My talk title today is Creating Gratitude. Since we're the Sunday after Thanksgiving, I want to actually reflect back on Thanksgiving. You know, it's already occurred. We're not getting ready for it. Instead, you know, we've already lived it. And what I want to do is I want to think about what that experience was like for us. You know, Thanksgiving is this holiday that's been kind of engineered. I am an engineer, you know. I'm actually a physicist, but I play like I'm an engineer. And so I think of things in that way. And it's really been kind of designed in order to take us to a place of gratitude. You know, Thanksgiving, gratitude, they're really the same thing. And so we have this holiday that's been put together in order to bring family and friends and a whole lot of food, you know? Just a table weighted down with food. And you know, it's the one day out of the year that we feel okay. You know, if we eat lots, it's okay. It's Thanksgiving, right? I think I'm still digesting a little bit of turkey, to be honest. But, you know, it's built around gratitude. And we say a prayer, maybe, you know, many places, many homes will say a prayer of gratitude before the meal and remind us of our blessings. And if during this holiday, during Thanksgiving that just passed, if that was your experience and you felt that heartfelt gratitude, then I think that's really wonderful. And I also know that that's not always our experience. Sometimes there's things that get in the way. You know, I kind of think of them as barriers to gratitude. You know, for instance, you know, there's for holidays, for Thanksgiving, oftentimes we're traveling. And we end up at airports or on freeways, canceled flights or long lines of cars in front of us that end up causing us to be very delayed to our Thanksgiving festivals or festivities. And so that can be a barrier to gratitude. And then we talked about all that food on the table, and you know, somebody's got to prepare it all. And hopefully the money was okay and it was flowing in order to get the food. And hopefully, you know, you didn't have your oven cut out on you on Thanksgiving Day, or, you know, you didn't experience the turkey not cooking quite long enough or taking way too long to cook, is what I mean. So that can be a barrier. And then we have family. We all love to have our family together on Thanksgiving, and yet family can have its baggage. And sometimes our family takes their baggage and puts it on the table and brings it all out to share, you know? And that can be a little bit of a barrier to really feeling grateful at Thanksgiving. So my talk title today is Creating Gratitude, because, you know, my thought is that there's got to be a way of feeling grateful even when those things show up in our lives. And so what is that process? And so I spent a little time this week kind of thinking, you know, I'm 54 years old, so I've experienced a few Thanksgivings, and I was thinking, well, what has been my experience of Thanksgiving? How has it turned out for me? And I realized that I've really got 3 different eras to my life. You know, that I've experienced Thanksgiving a little bit differently in those different times. The first one was my childhood. And then I know that for those of you who know me, you know that I've been married to Gabriel. We've been together, it'll be 20 years in January that we first met. But there was actually, before Namaste and before Gabriel, there was somebody else. I was with a man named Scott for 11 years during that time. So for a few of you who know me longer, you know, you might remember Scott. And so that was a different time. So in my childhood, you know, most of my time in my childhood, I lived in Alaska. And so we were well remote from all of our families. So my Thanksgivings were not the extended family Thanksgivings with all the cousins and all that type of stuff. My Thanksgivings were the nuclear family. So it was a small Thanksgiving celebration each year. Although sometimes my stepfather's mother, my grandmother, would come and visit us in Alaska, and that was always special, and I was grateful for her when she came. And then, my mother, if she was sitting there on the front chair, she would nod when I say she's a horrible cook. She's horrible. But my grandmother taught her to cook 2 meals, Thanksgiving and Christmas. And I looked forward to those meals so much, because the other 363 days of the year were not so great. But Thanksgiving, she made turkey with stuffing and mashed potatoes and gravy, and she had candied yams that I just adored, and there was a fruit salad. And then she made these sourdough rolls that were handmade, and they were just to die for. And I was grateful for that. And then there was the family. It was a small family, and, I think we had really high expectations for ourselves. And to be honest, I don't think our family was prepared to quite live up to those expectations. And so oftentimes, Thanksgiving, not so grateful maybe for that. But as I got older and I got into my relationship with Scott, we met when I was 23. He came from Fresno, and he had a huge family up there. We would go up, and we would drive up for Thanksgiving each year, and it was 50-some people around the table. And it was just, for me, from this small little group of 4 or 5, to go to 50 was just something very different for me. But his family was very nice. They were very sweet, and after me showing up a couple of years, they kind of expected me to be there, and they were very accepting, and I loved it. And Scott and I broke up on a trip back from Fresno. And so there's ups and there's downs. And then, I've moved on, and now I'm with Gabriel, and we have adopted 3 beautiful children. And when we adopted our first 2 sons, Cody and Dylan, they were 13 and 16, and they were from Hot Springs, Arkansas. That's where they had spent most of their life, and they had family. They had birth family that was there, and we wanted to make sure that they were connected. And so every Thanksgiving, we would drive for 2 days. 2 days there, 2 days back, listening to Harry Potter tapes all the way. That was our tradition. And, I had this purpose. I had a purpose of having my sons know their family. And I got to see it realized in front of my eyes. And I felt very, very grateful. And then there's this last Thanksgiving. It's right here, just a few days ago. And I realized as I was thinking about it that I've been kind of living in this aging process, not so much for me, but for my family lately. My dog, Toby, he's 14 and a half. That's over 100 years old for you and I. And he is a lab mix, and 14 years old, he's having a hard time getting up. And I had been thinking about, how long is Toby going to be here? And then my mother, who's 87, that's 87 for you and I, she fell and she broke her wrist, and then she had a small stroke and she was in the hospital. So I went up to see her, and she's home now, and she's doing just fine. But I realized that during that time, I was kind of in this thought of not the present moment. I was out in the future. I was in this anticipated grief type of thing. And I realized that I needed, in order to be grateful on Thanksgiving Day, I needed to come back into this moment and be thankful for what was showing up in my life right now. And so that worked. That was a way of having gratitude. And I know that so often on Thanksgiving Day that we do a process of counting our blessings. And I know oftentimes that works for me, that I can count my blessings and be grateful for what happens. But I know also that sometimes I count my blessings and I seem to be missing one. Where did it go? And my concentration goes not on this huge pile of things that are in my life, but on this one thing that's out there, and I'm like, where is it? And it's kind of a barrier for me to my gratitude. So, I thought today, the talk title for today is Creating Gratitude, because I thought, no matter what is going on in our life, there must be a way for us as human beings, as the divine spirit that we are, to always kind of be walking in gratitude. And I realized as I was thinking about it, that you can't really force gratitude, though. I know my mother tried, I think all of us parents have tried this with our kids. When I was sitting there with a meal that I wasn't quite happy with, she would look at me and she would go, "You should be grateful. Think of all those starving children in India or China or wherever it is of that day." But the truth is I never felt grateful when she said that. It just doesn't work. It really just does not work. We can't force gratitude. We have to come from a different place. So I was thinking, well, what are the barriers? I kind of talked about a few that are specific to Thanksgiving, but what are the barriers that are more general to us feeling gratitude in our lives? Well, for me, I was thinking back to my childhood period, and I talked a little bit about that a minute ago, but, one of the things about growing up for me was I felt like I was the parent in charge. And I also knew that I moved out of the house when I was 17. I was a very responsible kid. I went and I got a job and I put myself through high school and put myself through college. And, it was always me doing this and me doing that. And when that's my focus, me doing something for me, who am I supposed to be grateful to? Right? Am I supposed to have gratitude to myself? That doesn't actually work for me. I don't really feel grateful for myself. I might feel proud of myself, but I won't feel grateful for myself. So that was kind of a barrier to gratitude. And I realized that in that time that one of the things that I wasn't doing was I was not stopping to smell the roses. I was just focused on, I have to do this so that I can do that, so that I can do that. And if I do that, then maybe I'll get this and maybe I'll get that. I was focused on the things and the doingness of life. I wasn't focused on the beingness of life. And so taking an opportunity in our day to stop and be aware of who and what we are and what we have coming to us is a way of being in gratitude. But, I'm not saying that goals are not important. I think goals are important. But when goals become the modus operandi of how we are working, how we approach life, when we become a wanting machine, that's, I think, where gratitude dies, because machines don't feel gratitude. I also noticed that in that time of my life that I was never satisfied. There was always something more to be done. There was always something else to do, and I was never satisfied with my life. And when you're not satisfied, you're not going to feel gratitude. So there's lots and lots of barriers then for gratitude. So I thought, well, if I'm going to talk about gratitude, maybe I should make sure I know what the word means. And so I went to the dictionary and I looked it up, and one of the definitions that was in the dictionary that I really liked is, it says, a readiness to show appreciation for and to return kindness. So show appreciation and return kindness. Well, that kind of reminded me of the old Aesop fable, the one of the slave and the lion. This is the one where the slave is running away and he goes into a cave to hide, and what does he find? He finds a lion. And the lion isn't interested in eating him because it's got a thorn in its paw. And so the slave goes over and helps the lion and takes the thorn out of the paw. And then when the slave leaves, he's later caught. And he's sentenced to death by lion in the Colosseum, right? And when he gets out there, they put him out there, and then they release the lion. It's the lion from the cave. And instead of eating him like lions normally do, the lion just laid down at his feet and wanted him to scratch his belly. And the audience was so enthralled by this that they, clamored for him to be pardoned, and he was. So what this has to do with gratitude is that there was a cycle in this story. There's a cycle of the man being grateful for not being eaten. There's a cycle of the lion being grateful for the thorn being taken out. It's just gratitude to another person, thankfulness to another person, and they reflect it back. And you can end up with this being a cycle that we can live in of gratitude to gratitude, gratitude to gratitude, until it doesn't work anymore. Because, I love the idea of being grateful for what other people do. I think that's absolutely true. But if my gratitude is going to be dependent on your gratitude, I'm going to be disappointed at some point in time. Because whenever we take and have our emotions be a result of yours, I'm dependent upon you to do something, eventually you're going to disappoint me, because that's the human experience. So while I think that's a great way of creating gratitude, when it works, it's probably not the answer for every day. So I went back to the dictionary and I thought, well, maybe I'll find something else. And I looked at the etymology, which is just the place, the way the word came into being. And it said that the word came from the Latin gratis. Now, gratis, there is another word that's really important that has the exact same root, and that's grace. Now, grace is that place that lives within inside us. It's that place that we know absolutely that the divine thinks of us as being wholly acceptable. That there's nothing that we need to change, nothing that we need to do, nobody else that we need to be. It's just us. We're okay. And since that is a divine principle, that is always true. I don't have to rely on anybody else. I don't have to rely on you to feel gratitude, because what I know is that God, there is a grace in God. There is a grace in Holy Spirit. It's always alive. It's always there. So in this cycle, what I'm doing is I am being grateful, seeing the grace. The grace causes me to be grateful and see more grace. And that is a cycle that we can always count on to create gratitude. I want to make sure you realize you're not creating grace, though. Right? You're revealing grace. Creating gratitude, revealing grace. So I just want to leave you with one more story. It's a story that was told to me a couple of weeks ago by a friend of mine who has a daughter who's in her early 20s now. But she, this is a story from back when she was a teenager and she was in high school. And at that time, she had a teacher who used a process in class where each one of her classes, she had a jar. And she would put a marble in the jar every time the class did something that was on topic, or they behaved correctly, or they did something outstanding, whatever it was. As a reward, she would put a marble in the jar. And when they conversely did something that they weren't supposed to do, something that disrupted class or got them off topic, then she would take a marble out of the jar. And when the jar was full of marbles all the way to the top, she would postpone the lesson for the day and she would do something different. She would do something as a reward for the class. And when my friend's daughter was having problems with her friends, she was close to this teacher, and the teacher told her that what you need to do is you need to have an imaginary jar for each one of your friends. And when your friends do something where you feel included and you feel greater than, you feel good about yourself, then throw a marble in the jar. And when your friends do something to you where you feel less than or excluded or less than you could possibly be, you feel bad about yourself, basically, take a marble out of the jar. And what you'll find that there are people in your life that you call friends who have jars that don't have any marbles in them. All the time. They never have a marble in it. And those are the friends that you just need to let go of. Let them be. Let them go on their journey. They're good people, but they don't need to be with you. And on the other hand, the friends that you have whose jars are always filled with marbles, those are the ones you want to draw in close. And that's great advice for a teenager. I think it's great advice for adults too. But I want to ask you to think of this story in a slightly different way. I'd like you to think about your relationship with God, with Spirit. And imagine that you have a jar that you put marbles in every time you recognize that God has brought something into your life as co-creation. Something has come into your life that makes you know yourself as the divine, as an abundant spirit, as love, as peace, as joy. And you put a marble in God's jar. And every time you think that God has taken something away from you, take a marble out of God's jar. And the question is your jar for God filled with marbles or not? And if it's not, have you been taking out marbles for the right reason? And if it's not, maybe you haven't been recognizing the good that's been coming to you throughout the year, not just on Thanksgiving, but throughout the year. And if it is, if your jar is filled with marbles, have you been feeling gratitude as you're putting that marble in? Because the truth is that we are divine spirits. We are the power and the presence and the essence that God is. And everything that we do everything that we want, everything that we desire is supported by God. All of our good, just like we talked last week when we had our bag of stones, they're kind of like marbles, right? Those are the gifts that God brings into our life. And we are filled to overflowing, really, when we are aware of our lives and we are aware of the good and we are aware of who and what we are. I think absolutely God's jar should be full. And so what I want to leave you with is a challenge. I just want to challenge you to think about that. Think about your God jar over this coming week and see how full you can get it. Thank you. Namaste. So we're just going to go into prayer, and I invite the practitioners or anybody else who wants to keep the consciousness for the congregation to go ahead and stand. I just drop down inside of myself to that place that knows the power, the presence, the life that God is. That place that absolutely touches the infinite, down at the very core of my being. That place that listens to the still, small voice. That place that knows that the presence and the power that is God is love, is peace, is joy, is abundance. That place that knows that back of all things that we see in our lives today, there is a power and a presence and an essence that has created it into our lives. That power, that presence, which absolutely is back of all. It is all. There's nothing besides God. And as that's the truth of God, I know absolutely that's the truth of myself. I know it's the truth of every person here. In fact, it is truth of every person in this world, that the life and the power and the presence of God is awake, and it is well, and it is alive in each one of us. That joy and that peace and that harmony and that abundance that God is the truth of our very life, that it erupts out of us into the creative mode that is our life, individual for each one of us, and laid out on a path that we get to walk in joy and peace and love. And so it's from that place of knowingness that I speak my word. I speak my word for myself. I speak my word for this congregation, and I speak my word for the peace of this world. I know absolutely that that life that is God living itself as love is the truth of us. That life moving through us as love is the interaction that happens between us, through us, for us. That we are that power, that presence, that nothing else but that love is really the truth of our lives. And I know that the peace and the joy that God is wells up from us. It bubbles up like champagne. And we get to live and partake of that life in abundance, in joy, in peace, in harmony. And for knowing that, I am truly, truly grateful. For knowing that life and that power and that presence moving through my life, moving through your life, moving through this world with creative essence, infinite power. I just give thanks. And I release this prayer into the law, knowing that it's already fulfilled in the mind that God is, and I say it is good and very good. And so it is. Namaste.